Hi, welcome. I'm Susan Green, Associate Curator of Special Collections, Archives, and Research, and I'm here at Curators at Home having a collector conversation with Rhys Martin, the amazing president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association. He is an author, he's a photographer, he is just a man about town, and he has recently loaned this fantastic collection of objects from his personal collection to Philbrook and for our Tulsa Treasures exhibition. Of course, we're closed at the moment, but we wanted to make sure everyone gets to see them until we're able to reopen. And I wondered, so we invited Rhys here today to visit a little bit about the objects, visit about his project, and tell us about how he came upon these objects. So welcome, Rhys. We're so glad to see you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of, share the image from the display at Philbrook. Would you tell us a little bit about the objects?
I'd be happy to.
Here's our display.
Yeah, so this is a mixture of a lot of different types of artifacts. And as I researched the book, of course I came across photographs and things like that. But what really got my blood pumping was when I could get my hands on something tangible from these eras that I was researching.
And tell us about your project. So what's the name of your book and what was the project?
So the book is Lost Restaurants of Tulsa, and it's a profile of nearly 50 restaurants from Tulsa's past that are all gone now. So it turned into a project that really looked at the history of Tulsa through a very specific lens.
Absolutely. So you, as you were researching this book, you visited with families, you took photographs of the locations where they were, found photographs, found objects?
Right. And so, it was given to me, it was very open-ended. The publisher said, hey, we just would like, to know about some of Tulsa's old restaurants. So as I started researching, and I went to the University of Tulsa and the Tulsa Historical Society and the Central Library downtown, I found all kinds of great, newspaper articles and things like that. But it was really interviewing family members and employees of these restaurants that they really came to life. And so pretty quick, I realized it was the personal stories of each of these restaurants that was really important and something I needed to capture. And so when I look at a picture like this that we're looking at now of all these artifacts, like it just brings to mind all the people that were involved in these restaurants and their stories.
And the people that went to the restaurant celebrated special occasions or just everyday occurrences. So what are some of the restaurants that are represented in this display?
Well, this kind of runs the gamut so the first restaurant that's in the book is Bishop's, which was downtown from 1930 until 1966. And right there in the middle, you can see that beautiful menu with the Paul Corrubia drawing on the front. Paul Corrubia did a lot of architectural art in Tulsa's history, like the 30s and 40s. And there was a copy of this menu at the Tulsa Historical Society that I got to look through, and I'm very happy to finally get a copy of my own that I can have on display there because it is just so beautiful.
It really is.
And that's a look down Boston Avenue, looking at the Boston Avenue Methodist Church at the very end. And so a lot of people are familiar with this view, but not quite from this era, because so many of the buildings that are there today are not here in this photograph or this drawing. And so the plate in the background is from the Silver Castle. The Silver Castle ended up being a chain that spread through a couple of different states. It started in the 1930s by a man named Ike Parkey and his partner, James McCullum. And it was inspired by the White Castle system. If you can read the text on there, it's the Silver Castle system. Because eventually what happened was they turned this little, diner into a system where you could order everything from the silverware and plates to the cookware to the walls of your restaurant. You could order the whole thing, have it shipped and constructed. And so the little picture in the top middle is of one of those little restaurants. And at one point, Tulsa had almost a dozen of these things scattered around town. Just these really cool little stainless steel diners. The last one was in the Kendall Whittier district and closed in the early 1980s.
So it was basically like a mail order restaurant.
It could be, yes. And so that's why they spread out so quickly. But really right around the end of World War II, the business ran into some difficulties and stuff. And I'm glad Tulsa held on to one for so long. But the Silver Castle system as it was, kind of stopped being that organized and that kind of system in the late 1940s. But it's just another interesting little tidbit of Tulsa history that a lot of people had forgotten.
Absolutely.
We have a small ashtray right under it, and that's from the pagoda, which from a lot of people I talked to, it was the first place they ever had the experience of enjoying Chinese food. And that was on Brookside, and just a lot of fun memories. And that was another really great part of this project was I could mention a restaurant to people, and suddenly I'd get hit with all kinds of great personal stories, and it would bring out memories in people. And as I was interviewing for the project, I'd ask about a restaurant, and people would start telling me stories. And a lot of times, especially older people I interviewed would bring family along with them, children and grandchildren, things like that. And later the younger people would tell me, you know, I heard stories I've never heard before.
Really?
You know, because as you ask different questions, different memories bubble to the surface, and it was just a wonderful experience.
Especially as you have such a specific subject like restaurants. We all are, you know, food is so important to us. It's such a, especially right now, it comforts us, it helps us explore new ideas, new ways, and it's about the conversation and sharing those times. And so I could see how specific questions about restaurants might take you to stories that you'd forgotten about or conversations that you'd forgotten about.
Right, and the other way, you know, I get details from one person, like say the Golden Drumstick, for example. That's the menu on the right-hand side. That was at 11th and Yale. It was this great little Southwest-looking building. They were known for their fried chicken. And one of the details I got early on was they had these little wooden bowls they bring out to your table with kind of lemon water in it for you to wash your fingers, because they encourage you to eat with your hands. And they also had a wishing well up front that if you cleaned your plate as a kid, you could go get a prize out of that wishing well. And so instead of me just going and saying, hey, you remember the Golden Drumstick? What'd you think about it? You know, I'd tend to get kind of the same answers. But if I asked something more pointed, like, hey, do you remember the wishing well? Suddenly people were remembering the prizes they won, or they'd remember, you know, other things about the restaurant. And so as I went along, learning these details kind of helped elicit more from people, which of course, you know, most of that made it into the book and makes the profile of each of these places just come alive.
I could see the same, like my memories of Casa Bonita is the flag, the cave room, the treasures, like it's very specific. If you just said Casa Bonita, you think the facade of the restaurant, but you think
Sure.
more specifically, it gets
Well,
more.
I had someone mention to me the little treasure room, and that they had a little Curious George on a unicycle going back and forth in there holding a stick. And I remembered that, but if you'd asked me about it, that would have never been something that came to mind. You know, but it's just really wonderful to get these little details from people, because you're right. You know, the experience of eating out, especially back in the time when most of these restaurants were around, was a really big deal. It was a special occasion, and so it stuck in the memory of people.
And I could see how all of the different cuisines, like Chinese, Italian, if you're maybe from a farm family, you've just moved into the city, you're exposed to new types of food.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, I was talking to him about my project, and he lived in Broken Arrow and would remember the family getting into the car, driving all the way into Tulsa, which was a big deal then. You know, you went through the country to get here. Coming downtown to the Mandarin Cafe, which was the city's first Chinese restaurant downtown across from where the PAC is now. And they would always get the same meal on, I believe it was Easter. And so, you know, it was just such a crystal clear memory for him, because, you know, that was a big deal, and you couldn't just go anywhere to get Chinese food. And, you know, on the table there on the left-hand side, just to the left of the silverware, is a lighter, and that's from the Louisiane, which was at 18th and Boston, which was one of Tulsa's first really kind of fancy fine dining restaurants. They flew seafood in weekly. It was a big deal. The Herb Kallmeyer, which ran it for most of its life, you know, one of the things I learned from his son that I interviewed was that he never gave out old money. If someone needed change, it would be crisp, never circulated bills, because he wanted it to be part of that experience and feel like something special. But, you know, back then that was where you went when you really wanted to drop some money on a good meal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, I have great memories about Steve Sundry.
Yes.
And so I love seeing the photograph of the neon. And those memories for me are going in and finding books. My dad would be in the magazine section. My mom would be ordering something at the counter, and I would be in the kids' books, you know, looking for that book I hadn't read yet.
You know, and that's one of the few pictures in the book that I took. You know, as a photographer, I got into this realizing, you know, there's really not much I'm going to be able to take pictures of because all this stuff is gone. Even the buildings have been razed. But getting to interview Joni Stevenson about Steve Sundry's was just one of the great experiences of this project. And they still have the Steve's Fountain Lunch sign. And they brought out this huge scrapbook full of old newspaper articles and things like that, which is just a real joy and a real honor to be able to look through and get information from and all that. But you're right, Steve Sundry's is one, anytime I mention it to people, especially in like a group setting where I'm talking about the book and this project, you can just kind of feel the air go out of the room for a minute, because everybody that knew Steve Sundry's loved Steve Sundry's. Yeah. And you know what was it? Sometimes you had to move something to find something. It was, if they didn't carry it, they didn't make it. And so it was, people had such a strong connection to Steve Sundry's for a lot of different reasons, but that lunch counter at the back and their egg salad sandwiches was
exactly,
for a lot of people.
Salad, yeah. And then getting a shake or a malt, or, you know, that was such a treat. It was such a treat. Well, let me see you up close and personal. So
sure.
So you have really explored the gamut of restaurants, and you have I mean, we had just one small case that we could show off your objects in, but you have a huge collection. So do you have other things that you'd be willing to show us?
I do. I have quite a little bit, and you know, I keep a Facebook page going for the Lost Restaurants of Tulsa, and so I'll share photographs and things that I get, and that often turns into people reaching out to me saying, "Hey, I have this old postcard, or I have this old menu. I don't know what to do with it. You know, do you want it?" So eventually all this is going to go to the Tulsa Historical Society. So I'm very happy to, you know, be a caretaker for some of this stuff for a while, you know. But, you know, for the longest time, postcards were one of the ways that restaurants advertised their business. And this is for the Pagoda.
Yeah.
You can see their old neon sign, the dining room, and, you know, and then on the back, most of the postcards have a section with writing. Right. It's very limited, and so through that I could learn, you know, what was important. What did these places want to really tell about their business in a limited way? And so for the Pagoda, of course, it gives the address and says, "Finest of Chinese and American foods. Also see original hand-carved Buddhist shrine on display. Open daily, tourists welcome." And there's a picture here of this shrine. It's kind of hard to see on the camera, but it's this tall wooden shrine that sat as soon as you walked into the room. And that's another detail that I would ask people about the Pagoda, and they'd mention the food and the buffet on Sundays and going after church. But then I'd mention the shrine, and then people would light up. Maybe it was a detail they hadn't thought about in, you know, 30 years, and just talk about how ornate it was and stuff. Same with phone book ads. You know, phone books have kind of gone away, but getting to go through the old phone books at the Central Library was great, because not only did a lot of them have cool little artwork, but again, limited space, and the restaurants really had to figure out, what do we want to communicate with our limited space we have available, and you could kind of infer what, you know, they were proud of or what was important about their operation. This isn't a postcard, but this is part of an old matchbook that's been, you know, the matches are out of it, but this is for a restaurant called Lindy's, which was on Harvard. So after it was Lindy's, the owner, a man named Arch Pennington, opened Pennington's on Brookside. And it was so successful that he went back to the restaurant on Admiral, named it Pennington's No. 2. And it served as Pennington's for a while until Arch Pennington had to have heart surgery, decided he only wanted to have one restaurant going. He sold it to one of his cooks, Waller Miller, who turned it into Miller's Drive-In.
Oh my goodness.
And so depending on who you talk to, they'll remember it as one of the 3 restaurants. And so, in fact, in the display you have there at the Philbrook, there's an old wooden nickel from Miller's Drive-In that was good for 5 cents off. And so it's pretty neat to see how all these things kind of tie together or not. I also have started a collection of menus, because that's something that a lot of people have held on to. This is one of my favorites.
Ooh, the cutout is great. Is that from I love the design. Is it from the 60s?
So Shotgun Sam's, which is just opened in the 70s.
Oh, 70s.
And so, but it has that nice look to it, and the phone number starts with TE, which was Temple. Back in the day, a lot of the phone books started with a 2-letter code, which, you know, was Temple or RI for Riverside, and, things like that. And so on the back, you have Shotgun Sam himself. His horse Alice is not on here, unfortunately. But that was a very, very beloved advertising jingle of theirs. And of course, inside you have all their specials and prices. And man, looking at the prices, for example, one of the pizzas they have on here is the Colt 45, which is a spicy sausage pizza. If you wanted an extra large, it's only $2.40. And
that's totally different from today.
This is one.
A couple bucks to have a large pizza.
So this is one I was very pleased to get a hold of. This is an old menu for the Brown Duncan Tea Room, which used to be downtown, which was a department store. And back in the day, all these department stores had a little lunch counter or a tea room or something. And so the cover itself is just blank, but inside, I'm going to try to get this so you can see it, is 2 mimeographed pages with the typing in it.
Yeah.
So they could refresh the menus and keep using the covers. And this particular menu, I don't know if you can read it or not.
We can see the
May 7th,
nature,
1945. And so I can tell exactly what day this menu was printed and what the prices were.
And what was the date again?
May 7th, 1945. Which is, right as World War II was coming to an end. And so, again, it's amazing to kind of track, prices and even the way menus are put together. By the time you get to the 60s for something like this is Powers Restaurant, which was at about 26th and Harvard for a long time. You still have a little section here that's a cutout that's typed, weekly or however long, but then everything else is pretty standard. The Powers Restaurant Group, which ran Powers Restaurant, the Rubaiyat for a while, which was this great club out a little further south, for a time also ran the 1800, which was in Utica Square, which later became the Garden, which many people have fond memories of.
Yes.
But right here it says, when shopping in Utica Square, visit Powers 1800, kind of cross-promoting each other. And a lot of things. Go ahead.
I love that they're thinking about changing the menu, being responsive. What can they get today? What's in season? And of course, now that's what we hope restaurants do, is really play to the seasonality and what's available locally.
You're so right. And I've had this conversation with several people, is nowadays we don't really have much of a concept of seasonal foods. Everything's just available all the time, generally speaking. Another menu that I got, this is for the pig stands. There were a couple of them here in town. And on the back, this is written Christmas 1938 from the previous owner. So we know when it's from. But when you open it up, you have the menu here, but then you have a couple of inserts. And one of these inserts is maybe suggest these hot weather items. So when it is warm outside, it's salad bowls and cold lunches with a glass of beer, chilled fruit plate. And so you would have different specific inserts and things for different times of the year. If the weather that day was going to be different, they could just grab them from the back, put them in, and have things that are seasonally available. But
it's still die cut. I mean, it's still perfect for the menu.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, I'm sure you've heard stories about food. I mean, restaurants, you have to have stories about food. And of course, I've heard legendary stories about Pennington's Black Bottom Pie.
Yes.
And the Garden makes me think of Cleora Butler's baked fudge.
Yes.
And, somehow, that's interesting. The things I remember people telling me about are the sweets. But is there any stories like that stuck out as you were visiting with people?
Well, it tended to be very similar. You're right. Like I'd mentioned Pennington's, people would mention the Black Bottom Pie. They'd mention the shrimp that they would have. I'd mention Bishop's, and they'd talk about the Brown Derby, which was this little hamburger steak dish with Diablo sauce and shoestring potatoes. My Pie is, the first place a lot of people had Chicago-style deep dish pizza. But it wasn't always the food. My Pie, I happen to have a menu for here. On the back, it talks about their hi-fi radio. People would mention going in and just the music being really amazing and that kind of stuff, because they had a reel-to-reel in the back that was all custom-picked music. Nowadays, you just kick on the Wi-Fi and, go to Spotify or whatever.
Yeah.
But back then, if you had music in a restaurant, it was a big deal because it took a lot to make that happen.
So it's the experience of being in the restaurant.
Right. You mentioned Casa Bonita, talking to people about it, depending on how old they were when they went, their opinions of the food varied.
Yes,
I had the experience of going to the last remaining Casa Bonita in Denver just last year. which is even bigger than the one in Tulsa. It's 3 stories. They have divers that dive in a cave area, and it's just crazy. But they still have the flags and the sopapillas, and the food's still not anything really to write home about, but it never really was.
No,
It was the experience.
Yes. It's totally the experience. Well, do you see anything, I mean, right now we're in such a strange time. We're staying at home, we're able to do takeout. It's a really strange time for restaurants. Have you heard any, as you have all of these contacts, have you heard anything or had conversations with people about our restaurants today?
I have had some, and researching the book, there were several times in Tulsa's history where a huge event happened that caused a lot of restaurant closures. The oil crash in the 80s, the passage of liquor by the drink brought in a lot of competition from out of state because suddenly our liquor laws were updated and all these chains could move in. A lot of local restaurants couldn't compete with those prices. What we're going through right now with the coronavirus, I know is having a negative impact on a lot of restaurants. And so I feel like, especially in Tulsa, people have their fingers on the pulse of small business in a pretty good way. And it's just important to keep supporting these small restaurants as much as we can, whether it's curbside takeout, when things get back to whatever normal is going to look like, doing what we can to support them while remaining safe. Yes. Because every person that walks in and orders food makes a difference for these places.
Yes, absolutely. And my experience has been that the servers, the cooks, the people that are bringing food to our cars are so they're happy to do it. They are so kind, and I feel so grateful to them to provide the service, and so that we can. And it's so important for us to support our community, to support our neighbors, to support our small businesses. And so, yeah, we want to keep all of our restaurants as active, not lost restaurants of Tulsa.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, would you show us your book? I want to make sure people see the cover of the book. And I think it can be found at like Magic City Books and other retailers.
That's right. Magic City Books has them, other bookstores and places around town. I sell them through my website, which is cloudlesslens.com. And if you order from me, they're signed, and I get them shipped out to you. But yes, again, support local in the same way. Magic City has been such a great partner for me on this, and I love Jeff Martin and everything that they're putting their energy in, especially right now when they're also in this position of limited economic fluidity. Absolutely. And doing what they can.
Absolutely. And I have to give a plug for you as well. I attended one of your book talks probably a year ago or so, and you are such a fantastic speaker and have such knowledge, and you're so amazing with audience members. So many memories came out just in that little book talk. Things that stories I'd never heard of from the person next to me, the person behind me, and your wife, Samantha, is such an incredible baker, and she had brought her version of black bottom pie, and it was just to have that whole, again, it's the experience. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, Samantha, I don't know what I would have done without her. And I tell this story when I do give talks about the book, is that, the publisher reached out to me. Folks will walk up to me now and say, how do I get published? And I just tell them, you're going to hate me as soon as I tell you this, because they came to me. They gave me this project. I jumped in with both feet, and I'm like, this is great. And then I just froze because I really had never had a deep research project like this before. But Samantha went to the University of Tulsa, was a book review editor for the James Joyce Quarterly, and was really steeped in this. And so she held my hand and calmed me down when I started to freak out, and helped me kind of get through that. And like you mentioned, for the initial book release, which the Tulsa Historical Society Museum was kind enough to host for me, she had baked a bunch of small black bottom pies and some of that baked fudge from the garden, and we got a recipe for hot toddy bread from the Middle Path, which was in the old Golden Drumstick at 11th and Yale, and a few other things that people were just so excited to get a small taste of, because these recipes show up once in a while in the Tulsa world and things like that. But you'd be surprised. I thought about maybe including a few recipes in the book. I ended up not having a word count that would support it, but you know, even restaurants that have been closed 30 or 40 years, those family members hold those recipes close to the vest because you never know what the future is going to bring.
That is true. You never know what the future will bring. And we look forward to seeing your next project. And we love having the objects at Philbrook. At some point, we will be able to open back up, you know, knock on wood. But and we can't wait for people to actually see your objects and share those memories together of the Louisiana, the Golden Drumstick, Bishops. But thank you for showing us even new things, more things today. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of your work bringing community organizations together, like the Historical Society in Philbrook and Magic City Books. So thank you for that. And thanks, Sam, as well. And thanks to all of the people who are watching from home. Make sure that you check out Rhys's website. He is an amazing photographer, by the way, and documents Route 66. So his story of Route 66 is fantastic. And then when we're back open, please come and see Tulsa Treasures and see Rhys's collection. So thank you so much, Rhys. Thank you to everybody watching. And we'll see you soon, we hope.